this is Brian Overby, and welcome to this educational edition of Options Guide TV. We are going to get into the basics of options. So over the holidays, we're going to do a few educational pieces that are going to get to the heart of what options are and the very beginning of option trading. So today's show is titled Options 101, The Beginning. So I'm going to also use the options playbook, optionsplaybook.com, to go through the introduction of an option contract. But before I jump right into it and what is an option, I always like to give a little bit of background, because a lot of people that come into the options marketplace for the first time think that, oh, I'm going to learn how to get rich using the leverage factor in an options contract. And they think of options as speculation tools, more so than what they were first intended for, and that is for protection, to try to hedge something or protect something against a downward movement in the marketplace. Now, options have been around for centuries, but the biggest thing about the options marketplace is that there's never been a solid backer of the option contracts. So you think of options, you think of futures that kind of go hand in hand a little bit, but you talk about corns, grains, oil. These are the things that where options evolved from. One of the first instances of options was actually in the 16th century. The Dutch aristocracy made a big run up in tulip bulbs, and it became very vogue, to use this day's terminology, to own tulips. And when the craze got so high, when the economy was doing so well, people started to insure the tulip bulbs, and that would have been an instance of a put option contract. But as with most economies, you have ebbs and flows. You have bubbles, and then you have crashes. And when the tulip market crashed and everybody had these insurance policies, these put options on these tulip bulbs, most of the people went to took off and were never seen again. So the options marketplace struggled all the way up until we finally got the Chicago Board Option Exchange to open up a listed exchange and back it with something called the Options Clearing Corporation. So once we got to a point where options were being traded on a listed exchange and there was a true backer behind the option contracts, we've never had a default on the option contracts ever since the Options Clearing Corporation was put in place, I should say, or began backing the option contracts. Okay, so moral to my story. If you think of options and you only think of them as speculation, you will never really understand where the option contracts come from, and that helps you understand the marketplace in general. And most importantly, it helps you understand the pricing of an option contract. So with that said, because options were first intended to be used as protection, there is a lot of similarities between the options marketplace and the insurance world. First of all, when you go and get a quote on an option contract, and that's what we're going to look at here today, and we're going to spend a few minutes just talking about that option quote and what that means. That's literally a contract, and it's summarized down to the very basics of that contract. But when you get that quote, you see a price. That price is called the premium. And let's say you're buying your first option contract, and we'll talk about call options and put options, but let's say we're buying a call option on an underlying stock that we'd like to own. And so we buy that call option. Well, somebody has to sell it to you. Guess what that seller is referred to as? They're referred to as the writer of the contract. Just like in the insurance world, if you buy an insurance policy, whomever you might buy it from, they are referred to as the underwriter of the contract. They literally write up the contract and say, this is your policy, give us some money, and now you have a car insurance policy. But the underwriter puts that together. So every time you look at an option contract and you see it being quoted, it really doesn't exist until somebody buys it. And when they buy it, that means somebody sold it. So at that point in time, somebody has written that contract, and somebody has then also purchased that contract. And from that contract and that outlay of cash, they now have a right to do something. And the person that sold that contract now has an obligation to do something. All right. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go to the Options Basic tab inside the Options Playbook, and we're going to look at the quote, just a very generic quote of an option contract and talk about those pieces that are behind it. So let's run to the Options Playbook right now. And we see here's the Options Basics tabs. Here's the introduction. So if I scroll down a little bit here, and I don't want to be too herky-jerky, I want to jump on over to the basics. That was the intro. And just look at exactly what the definition of an option contract is. And then we're going to talk a little bit about this quote that we have drawn up inside the playbook. All right, so options are contracts giving the owner, the buyer of the contract, a right to buy or sell an asset at a fixed price. Now that's referred to as the strike price for a specific period of time. So if I buy an option contract, I'm going to have the right to buy the underlying, and that's usually 100 shares of stock. And I'm going to own that right to be able to buy that underlying at a specified price, which we call the strike price. And as with all contracts, you think of car insurance, you usually have a 6-month or a 1-year policy. Option contracts also have an expiration date. So if we look at a contract, which is actually displayed as a quote in the options trading world, it takes all the guts of the contract and it highlights these main points. It highlights what is the underlying. It highlights what is the expiration date. It highlights what is the price at which this transaction would take place. And then we have two different flavors of option contracts. We have calls and we have puts. And calls, by the way, let me scroll down a little bit because this I like this little graphic we put in the playbook. But a call is actually called a call option because it allows you to call stock away from somebody. And that's where that term came from. And a put is the exact is named a put exactly the same way because it allows you to put stock to somebody. So you have calls, which allow you to buy the underlying stock, and you have puts, which allow you to sell the underlying stock. And the playbook, there's other things that you can trade. You got futures options, you have index options, but I've only focused inside my book on actual stock options. So let's run back here and let's kind of finish this thought. So if I see a stock, and this is a generic quote, even got it's actually a quote from way back when the book was first written, but we have XYZ. So that would be the symbol for an underlying stock. That could be IBM, that could be Apple, that could be Amazon, but almost all option contracts represent 100 shares of stock. And that's very important because that's going to reflect in the premium or the price of the option contract, the cash outlay that you have to put up in order to own that option contract. The number of shares directly affects the number of shares that the contract represent. It directly affects the price or the cash outlay that you have to pay for an option contract. So notice it does say usually represents. Sometimes there's option contracts that will get modified, but that's usually because of a takeover or a fancy stock split or something like that. So something has to happen in the marketplace and have existing option contracts for this number, 100 shares, to change. So unless you're trading in some stocks that have had some mergers or acquisitions or stock splits, not too much to worry about. It's usually 100 shares. Okay, and now here, December 17th, we're taping this. Actually, on December 18th is when we're doing this taping. But that expiration date back in the day was always the third Friday of the month. So just automatically, there was one monthly expiration that used to happen when the Chicago Board Option Exchange first started trading listed option contracts. Now we have a plethora of different expirations. We have some option contracts that will expire every single day. A lot of option contracts expire every week. There's a ton of those option contracts, and those are called weekly options. And then just in this day and age, it's limitless as to how many different expirations are available. Back in the day, part of the reason why they only had one expiration date was, if you think about it, you have one underlying stock. That's simple. Let's use IBM for an example. You have that, and if you want to get a quote on IBM, you just type in IBM, you get that quote, and that's for that stock. Well, in the options marketplace, there's going to be many different expirations. There are going to be many different strike prices. So quoting back in the day, when there was not a lot of bandwidth, was a big issue. So just the fact that the technology couldn't really keep up with what the demand for a ton of different expirations really affected the options marketplace. Once we got to a point where we could quote all of these different strikes and basically unlimited memory, if you will, and ability, then they've opened up the options marketplace and have traded a lot of different expirations. Now, one of the things that happens, though, is if you have more and more expirations to trade, you have a lot more to choose from. So keep in mind that if they still limit the expirations because there are limited people that are buying the option contracts. And the more offerings that are available, the less liquid the option contracts become, because there's just not a lot of demand for that option contract. All right, so gone into a little bit more detail than I probably needed to, but with that said, it's a very important concept. After this expiration date, that option ceases to exist, and that's why it's important to be correct on your forecast. I've done it many times in the option trading world where you're correct on your forecast, but that option contract expired before the scenario played out. Okay, so expiration dates, there's many of them available in this day and age, but just be aware that after that date, that option ceases to exist. And the strike price, very important, obviously. If you're talking about a call option, this is the price at which you're going to be buying the option contract, and also the price at which you're going to be selling that option contract. Depends on if you're buying a put or if you're buying a call. That will determine that. It's also called the exercise price. So if I exercise my option contract because I bought that option, I then will be buying the underlying stock. It'll be 100 shares in our generic example at that price if it's a call option. If it's a put option, I would be selling that 100 shares at that price. In this generic example, we have a call option, and then here's the price of the option contract. And I'm going to scroll up and kind of show you this here. So that's the premium or the cost per option contract. You take this price to get the total cost and multiply it by 100. So this option contract is $3.10 times 100, or $310 plus any fees or commissions that you might have to pay to buy that option contract. All right. That's the very basics of options. We're going to come back. We're going to get into more detail on some option pricing and some very basic option strategies. So that's it for this edition of Options Guide TV. Hopefully we will see you at the next edition. We are every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Thanks for coming, everyone.